time. So okay. Well, first, I'd like to welcome y'all. I appreciate your interest in Concours Judging. I'm Gary Edwards. I'm past president of Peachtree Section, member of the Concours Committee, and I'm pleased to talk to you today for a while about how to do Concours Judging. There's some ground rules for our Zoom presentation. One is to stay muted unless you're called upon. That prevents noise in your background from dominating and taking away from the ability of others to hear the presentation. When you have questions, I want you to put your questions in chat and chat to everybody. That way we can all see it, and Diana Quinn, who's helping me with this, can help monitor the questions. One of the things I've learned is that when you're doing the presentation, it's very hard to actually pay attention to a chat window. And so if you only are chatting it to me, I probably won't see it. So that's why chatting to everybody is very useful. The other thing I need to mention is if we lose control of the presentation, if we get kind of Zoom bombed or something like that, and we can't recover from it, what we will do is we'll immediately terminate the presentation, and then we will come up with another Zoom link and send it out via the same email that you got this Zoom link on. So if that were to happen, it's really unlikely, but if that were to happen, just monitor your email. We'll get the presentation going back up with a different link as soon as possible. Okay. All right, so with that, I do want to introduce a couple of regional directors we have with us. First, Diana Quinn, the Eastern Regional Director, who is hosting and helping me out with the presentation, and she's always a great resource for everything MBCA, having been a section president of a couple of different sections. So I really appreciate her help in this. Thank you, Diana.
You're welcome.
I also noticed Dave Wilmer, I think, is with us. He's the Southeast Region Director, so we appreciate his interest in this. I know Dave is also helping out nowadays with the Star magazine, so we certainly appreciate that. And we've noticed the last edition of Star magazine was a quantum leap from the previous one, so really appreciate his help in doing that. All right, let's talk about Concours Judging of Mercedes Automobiles. I need to do a screen share here. And so let me do share screen. And okay. And the thing about Zoom is you never quite know twice in a row how share is going to work with PowerPoint. So let's see. You should be seeing my first slide. And it looks like that is what you're seeing. Okay.
Yep.
Concours Judging of Mercedes-Benz Autos. Okay. So let me flip to the next slide. So here's our agenda. It's kind of a little motivating about why we talk about this. I'm going to go over the rulebook changes from last year. There were no rulebook changes for this year. A little bit about what we expect from the entrants, what we expect from the judges, how the scoring works, score sheets in the various categories, show, street, and custom. And then we're going to go over the areas on the score sheet with the kind of things that you see and a little bit on how much you might deduct for those items. And we'll break sometime in here, and it will certainly break before we get to the quiz. And after that, there'll be a quiz. And we'll ask you when it comes time for the quiz to chat your name into the chat window. So we can take attendance for the quiz. And when the quiz is over, we'll ask you to chat your name into the chat window. And that way I can verify that you at least stayed around and paid attention to the quiz. All right, so why do we teach this class? Well, you know, from the myopic little Peachtree view to have enough judges to run our concours. But from a larger view, now I think that concours is an important thing for a single mark car club. And the most challenging thing about concours, running concours, is having enough judges. And so, you know, I want to train judges in my local area, but I'm interested in training judges across MBCA so that it'll be easier to run concours. I think concours is important. And so we're going to go through, you know, what we expect from judges and how to score and how to kind of get through the day a little bit too. And at the end of this, you'll be certified to judge concours. So now when you get through this course, you're going to be confident, you're going to be consistent, and you're going to be fair. And I often hear from someone after the course saying, well, I don't really, feel comfortable doing, X, engine compartments or interiors, but you know enough to do it. And the most important piece of concourse judging is being consistent. If taking the same amount off from car to car and not penalizing things unfairly. And as long as you're consistent in the way you do that, you'll be perfectly fine. Yeah, I mean, no one knows everything about every car. I mean, Mercedes has been building cars for 40 something years. And there's lots of different varieties in the cars and lots of different changes, even running inside a chassis and different as the chassis runs through the years. No one knows everything. We give the entrant the benefit of the doubt, but as long as you're consistent, it'll be fine. And the other thing you get from this, by the way, as I've noticed, is once I started doing concourse judging, I got a lot better at evaluating cars for potential purchase. Even by, looking at their pictures on Bring a Trail, I can pick out details that I could never pick out before. It's very, very helpful. And, I think it's fun. And when you think about what we're trying to do with concourse, if you remember Stephen Covey and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of those was begin with the end in sight. And what's the end that we want here? One, at the end of the day in a concourse, we want the scoring done in a reasonable amount of time so that you can get the awards presentation done and get everybody home before dark. Okay, kind of obvious, but not the easiest thing to do sometimes. You want scoring to be completed and there not to be any ties. You want the winners to be the right cars. The nicest, the best cars for our rules should win. And don't forget, at the end of the day, you want the entrants, the judges, the volunteers, the participants to all feel good about the event. I mean, if we want concourse to succeed, we want the entrants to come back in the future. You need the judges. We want them to come back. You need the volunteers. So it's got to be a pleasant experience for them. So think about that as we're going through this and as you do your judging. And the 3 basic learning points here. Be consistent in your judging. You take points off commensurate with the allocation of points on the score sheet. And you recognize through the teaching in this course that in most cases, half the scoring is authenticity and half the scoring is condition on the score sheets. And we'll go through that more, but those are the basic learning points of this course. Okay, the references are the rule book. It's available on the MBCA website. I also sent a link out to it in the Zoom, and the score sheets are in the rule book. They're in the appendix in the rule book. Okay, so I always have the rule book with me when I'm doing chief judge at a concourse. Okay, so let's go briefly through the changes in the rule book. Those of you that had this training years ago, this will bring you up to speed on the changes that we did in the rule book. We did not do any changes this year, so these are the 2023 changes. If you look at the rule book now, you notice it's reorganized. It's basically easier to use. We included a discussion of what I consider to be on-ramps to concourse. And since I want concourse to succeed and I want it to be easy to attract people to concourse, I wanted to have some areas that you could have kind of low barriers to entry. And one was a show and shine category where instead of doing the intensive concourse judging, you have kind of a basic subjective presentation and use of car scorecard that doesn't require the intensive concourse scorecard. We put that in the rule book this year. I actually pretty much stole that scorecard from Porsche Works Reunion. If anybody's used to that, it's exactly the same scorecard as Works Reunion. But I've seen that people are more willing to enter that class because it doesn't have the stigma of concourse. And then when you get onto the field, they realize that concourse isn't that hard. We had never had a custom scorecard in the rule book before, even though the rules were there. So we put a custom scorecard in there, and we'll talk about that later. We changed the wording a little bit. We used to call these things I see listed here, show, street, custom. We used to call those classes, and then we had classes for all the cars. That was pretty confusing. And so we changed the terminology so that we have show category, street category, custom category, and Silver Star category. And then we have classes for the cars. And we revised the classes so that we included all the cars, including all the new ones, including the electric vehicles. We clarified some areas. There's always been a discussion of how much you take off for a non-original top. So we just put it in the book, a quarter point. We clarified some things that we've been training on and had never had in the rule book. Now, for example, if there's no spare in one of the cars in the class, you don't judge spares in that class. If batteries are in the trunk in some of the cars in the class, you don't judge batteries. And those are for consistency. We also decided to specifically allow some dealer options. In the book, we say pinstripes on 107s, that is the SL from 72 to 89. But right now, I think I would probably not penalize a pinstripe on any of the cars. And I probably, if I'm involved in it for the next revision, we'll probably put that in the next revision of the rule book. Dealer installed AC on the Pagodas has always been okay. We specifically called that out in the rule book. And then we added a few more things for consistency with current practice, like always judging convertibles with the tops up. Convertibles having the option to show with the hard top on if they came with a hard top. A more intensive discussion about 50-50 split between authenticity and condition, which wasn't very clear in the old rule book. And specifically calling out giving the entrant the benefit of the doubt, which we've been training on, but really wasn't in the rule book. And we defined where the trunk is for an SUV. We said in show category, you can tow a race car or a track car, a car that's not street legal, and not be penalized. In street, we mentioned 5-digit odometers, which I had never thought of before in there. The issue is that in street category, you get a mileage bonus, and with a 5-digit odometer, is it 152,000 or is it 52,000? So we asked that the entrant has some documentation to verify whether it's really 150,000 versus 52,000. And we put in a protest procedure that I hope no one ever uses. And we added a discussion of computerized scoring. And the issue with computerized scoring is, we encourage use of computerized method of scoring, but the score sheet has to be the same. It needs to use the same score sheet. And what you will see as we discuss what we're going to be using at our Star Summit concourse on October 5th is a total adaptation of the score sheet on Google Sheets. And Sam Camber will be talking to us about that as I finish this presentation. Okay, so we'll transition now to what do we expect of the entrant? And I cover this one for what you should see as judges, but also a lot of you are also entrants. And so this is kind of, what you're supposed to be doing, as if you didn't already know. But we expect the entrants to arrive early. We expect to be ready at the designated start time. And there's typically a time when cleaning should stop. And, we expect entrants to stop cleaning when cleaning should stop. I mentioned in here, have extra seat and floor coverings removed. Nowadays, I'm asked really often, well, should we tell the entrant to have their floor mats removed? And, we've always kind of told them to have their floor mats removed. Honestly, I don't care. If the floor mat's in the car and I'm the interior judge, I'm going to judge the floor mat instead of the carpet. Now, it's probably not to the entrant's benefit to leave the floor mat in, because the floor mat is usually more worn than the carpet is. But, I'm not going to order the entrant to pull his floor mats out. And that's just me. And one of the things that we absolutely expect is the entrant needs to be near the car to present the car and, be there to open the doors and stuff for us. It's very frustrating when you as a judging team get to the car and you can't find the entrant. So it's really important that the entrant stays near the car. We expect the entrant to kind of stand back as you start to judge. You kind of stay out of the way and not really, bug you with lots and lots of questions. I'm glad to answer an entrant's questions, but I always feel a time constraint as I'm doing the judging. And so I will typically tell an entrant that has a lot of questions that I'll be glad to see him after judging is done, but my time constraint right now tells me that I need to continue to judge. And we've all seen these car shows where you have an easel with magazine articles, or maybe that stuff's laid out in the trunk or something like that. We don't judge that. That's not part of the judging. And we really can't have it laid out in the trunk. I mean, honestly, if I had a fault in the carpet in my trunk, I would certainly lay a magazine over it so the judge couldn't see the fault. But, as a judge, I want that out of there so I can actually see the car. And we expect the entrant to leave the car there for the entire time that we say that concours is on. It's for the benefit of the spectators, for one. But the other is, it's kind of a safety issue. If there's a whole bunch of people walking around, we don't really need to have cars moving around either. And of course, we can't force them to stay there. If they're going to move, they're going to go, but we really like them to stay there the entire time of the event. So for the judges' etiquette, the judging team, when going to judge a car, you introduce yourself to the entrant. You also thank them for bringing the vehicle. Always think about, you want the entrant to come back, so let's treat them such that they'll come back. One of the basic rules, don't touch the car. In MBCA concours, the judges don't touch the car. You don't have to get in the car to judge it. This is to avoid any potential damage to the car from the judging process. Now, this is another reason why we expect the entrant to stay near the car, because when you have to have the doors opened or the hood open or the trunk open, you ask the entrant to do it. Now, there's an exception here. What often happens is a judge will have a car entered and they're off judging, and that other judging team gets to the car. And there's two ways to handle that. One way to handle that is to put the judge's phone number on the car, have him call, and then detach from the judging team that he's on to come back and present the car and open it up. And of course, that other judging team is really pretty much stopped from judging while waiting for him to get back. Now, the other thing that I see most often, and what I encourage, is for the judges to put a sign on the car that said, "Okay for judges to touch the car." That's what we usually do in Peachtree. You don't want to be dropping stuff on the car. I remember I was really embarrassed one time when I had some sunglasses up on my head. I leaned over, and I won't tell you what car it was, but I was really embarrassed that sunglasses fell off onto the car. Didn't do any damage, but it's really important not to have loose items, not having metal. I usually take my belt and put it off to the side so there's no chance I'll be scratching the car with the belt. And when the entrant sees that you're taking that kind of care when you're around the car, I think they'll appreciate that too. If you have to ask the entrant a question, the judging team leader should be the one to do it. And you might need to ask about the options on the car, or the mileage, or the color code, or something like that. And it's okay to review the findings before moving on to the next car, but I find that I just don't have time to do that. As I said, I'm glad to talk to a person afterwards for as much time as is necessary, but I need to get the judging done first. Okay, walk through the field prior to the start of the judging. There's a couple reasons you do this. One is finding all your cars. In the best of all possible worlds, all the cars will be parked together in your class that you're judging. But I've seen where we've had a car in a totally different fairway that we had to send a team off to look for. So try to locate all your cars that you're going to be judging. But the other piece is look at what's in your class. It is conceivable, for example, the 107 SLs. I've mentioned that for some of them, the battery's in the engine compartment. For some of them, the battery's in the trunk. If you've got that spread of vehicles, then you've got to start off knowing I'm not judging batteries, or I'm not judging spare tires, depending on what spread of cars you have. If you're in show category, and you're judging undercarriages, it might be good to start with the lowest car first, because you will not be able to see everything in the chassis area on a low car. And so that tells you, that kind of calibrates you on what stuff that you shouldn't be looking at in the other cars that are taller. And my preference would be to start, if I could know which one it was, I would start at the least nice car first. If you end up starting with the nicest car, you can, what seems to happen to me, if you start with the nicest car, you get to about the third car after that and you see something, and then you say, oh, did I look at that in the first car? And if the answer is no, or if you're not sure, then you shouldn't penalize it in car number 3. And so you'd really be better off if you could start at a car that had more deficiencies. It's hard to tell, but that's kind of my philosophy on it. And each team will have a leader. As head judge, I will usually designate who's going to be the team leader. But there's backing up. There's 2 general ways to approach assigning the teams. The way that I was always taught in MBCA, since the scorecard either has 4 or 5 sections on it, say engine's one of the sections. You would assign a team for engine, you assign a team for paint, you assign a team for glass and chrome, etc. And so these teams have to go and judge the car, and they can't judge car at the same time because we have a 1-page score sheet, and you can't have that in the hands of a couple different teams at the same time. And so you have 4 or 5 teams that descend on the car, and the car gets judged either 4 or 5 times. It's a little ponderous, and it's a little hard to tell that you've actually judged all the cars. And so when I have the privilege of being head judge, I don't do it that way. What I do is I assign a judging team for the car, and that team may have 2 people, it may have 3 people, it may have up to 5 people. And since there's either 4 or 5 areas on the scorecard, and the way you do this with one team judging the car simultaneously, you go to the car, you introduce yourself, of course, to the entrant. You start with the car all closed up. The paint and the coach work judge walks around the car and looks at the gaps in the body lines. And when that judge is done, then you have the entrant fully open up the car, and then you judge all the rest of the things on the scorecard. And that way the car, when the judging team is done, the car is done. It's better for the entrant because the entrant doesn't have to hang around for 5 different or 4 different teams. And it's a little bit more intuitive that you've actually judged all the cars when you do it that way. Now, computerized scoring makes it easier to do that. If you wanted to do it this way with paper scoring, all you'd have to do is take the pieces of the scorecard and print them up separately on separate sheets of paper, and so that you could just simultaneously distribute those pieces of the scorecard to the team as they're doing the judging. One other thing I think is really neat, so if you're familiar with the Porsche Club of America, when they do this, they do the simultaneous judging method. They also have a timekeeper, and when they start the judging after the car is opened up, they have a person start a stopwatch, and they either have 4 minutes or 5 minutes to complete the judging on that car. And that really helps you move along the judging, and it prevents you from spending a really long time period on one car and a very short period on another car. And it helps to get through the day. Okay, so that's the judge's etiquette. Let me go look at questions, see what we have here. Okay.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much, the one comment was about the floor mats, about whether in or out, maybe the rule book could be a little more specific. I responded that, the chief judge could make that determination.
Yeah, I just, you're really expected to take the floor mats out. I just don't think it's worth, grabbing the entrant and telling him to get it out, because leaving it in is usually not to their benefit.
Yeah, well, actually, I'll walk around to the cars that I know that I'm going to do in my class ahead of us starting. And when I see floor mats in, I just advise them to take them out, and I also tell them to empty the trunk because first time concourse entrants don't know those rules.
Yeah, that's certainly a good approach too. And see, there's a question, where do unrestored cars go? Well, because we don't make a distinction between restored cars and unrestored cars. What we're doing, and I probably should have started this out, our judging criteria is we're judging the car to see how close it is to the way it came from the factory. And so a car that's been maintained well over the last 30 years and is exactly as it came from the factory with no restoration is great. A car that has been restored to the way it came back from the factory is great. Either of those are fine. We don't break out an unrestored car from a restored car. There are groups that do that. We do not break that out. We could in another iteration of the scorecard.
Yeah.
What typically happens though is, for us, we're often scraping to have enough cars to, to have the concourse. And so breaking it out into other categories is, I think, a little bit of a challenge. Question on cocoa mats. I love cocoa mats. They did not come originally in Mercedes. I do love cocoa mats. Do you as a judge can give, I don't, the question is, do you as a judge can give the TL preference of certain series, especially a series you as a judge are familiar with? Oh, I think he's asking about whether preference. Of course, the chief judge, I try to assign people based on their preferences. And
And
I've changed judging assignments based on that before on the fly.
and the knowledge, right?
Yeah, and the knowledge, but okay, let me be very specific. Andrew Staskfugel has a question about battery condition. If in classes where the battery is for some cars invisible and for others visible, it's not fair to judge the batteries on the cars that they're visible and not judge them on the ones that are invisible. And so if you have a class where that condition exists, you just don't judge the battery. And that goes for any aspect of the car where some of the cars in the class have that aspect and others don't. To be fair, you don't judge that aspect of it. And that's a really important consistency point. Okay. You've got to be consistent. So almost the most important thing. Add-on cup holders or cassette boxes. Add-on cup holders are a deficiency if they didn't come with the car. It's not a big deficiency, but it's a deficiency. I'd like to defer some of these questions because I'm going to get to some of this stuff. Robert Sutter asked, how do we judge undercarriages? Well, what I do for judging undercarriages, I usually carry a piece of cardboard or I carry what's called a magic creeper, which is essentially a blanket that rolls on itself. And I lay down on the left side of the car, I lay down on the right side of the car, I lay down on the front of the car, I lay down on the back of the car, using either the cardboard or the creeper to not get dirty and look and see what I can see. I don't crawl under the car. And I do it the same way on every car for consistency. Okay. All right. Let me go back to the presentation now. I think we've got Brad Purvis says, I believe cocoa mats were available at least on the W113. Yeah, I don't think that I am like certain the cocoa mats did not come from the factory. They may have been a dealer installed option, but we didn't make an allowance for that being a dealer installed option on pagodas. All right, so let's go to judges' responsibilities.
I thought you said, I'm sorry, Gary, I thought you said it was the criteria is as it comes off the showroom floor.
No, it's really the criteria is as it came from the factory.
So off the end of the assembly line.
Yeah, off the end of the assembly line. And we make a few exceptions for dealer installed options. For example, none
Some
of the,
assembly line cars that came off in Europe are different than assembly line cars that came off in the United States, I would guess.
yeah, that's true.
But
And
that's,
if it's a European delivery, if it's a European model car in, and I'll get to this in, if you let me get to it.
okay, I'm sorry.
If it's a European model car in show category, it needs to be true to the European specifications. And if it's an American model car, it needs to be true to the American specifications. In street category, you can do things like put European lights on a US version car and it'll be okay. We don't penalize that.
It didn't come off the assembly line that way.
Yeah, but that's the, we have certain different rules for street category. Street category was also designed to be an easier entry point to concours than the show category. And so we allow more things in street than we do in show. But you have to be more than 25 years old to be in show. I'll get to that. Let me get to some of this stuff. Okay. Getting a little ahead of my presentation.
Can I make a very, very quick comment on the mats?
Sure.
The floor mats.
This is Sam Camber, our Petries Concours Chair.
Some of the vehicles, so for example, the Designo edition, like the vehicle that I have, the one that you see behind me, that comes from the factory with floor mats that are embroidered with the Designo logo, with the binding on the side of the mats, matching the leather in the seats. So in that situation, so what we're going to do for this concourse, we're going to ask the participants if they have something unique about their vehicles. There will be a sheet that will be on the windshield. So the judges will be able to see, to look for items that might not be that obvious. Like, for example, like the floor mats. Because I, for one, have had deductions in the past on the floor mats, and they are specific to the vehicle. So
Yeah,
we're going to try and cover that.
You have to be very careful about some of the Designo pieces. And I know of at least one car in Carolina section that's a Designo car before Designo. And fortunately, the owner has enough documentation to show that the car actually was delivered that way. But that's one where you ask the entrant, and it's kind of ask a John Bernardi question. Tell me about the floor mats instead of, an accusational question. Tell me about the floor mats. And that gives the entrant the opportunity to explain that, oh, those are Designo floor mats, and they actually did come that way. And you might even have a picture of the way the car was delivered or something. Okay. All right, let's go back to the presentation. All right, this responsibility to the judge obviously only take off for real flaws, but more than that, it's important to know what the rules are and to know the score sheet. And I'm not saying you have to memorize the score sheet, but you do have to know kind of what's on the score sheet and where they are. There are some places where knowledge that, oh, that's over on glass and chrome versus over on paint and coachwork. Very useful to know those type of things. And this comment about always remain within the scope of your judging responsibilities, that's another consistency rule. And the example of that is like you're the interior judge, and you, as you're walking towards the car, you notice something that's deficient in the engine compartment. Now, what do? Well, you're not the engine compartment judge. You don't grab the engine compartment judge and point it out. You just totally ignore it and pay attention to the interior, which is what you're supposed to be judging. The reason for that is consistency. We want the same person looking at the cars in the same way and taking off for the same stuff. And it does not help consistency if you point out something on this one car over here that you're not looking at on all the rest of the cars. So don't do that. If you're the interior judge, focus on the interior. And of course, watch the clock. The chief judge will tell you in the judges meeting when judging needs to be completed. And of course, it's simple math to know, okay, that's that many hours, there's this many cars, we have this much time per car. And it's often very challenging to get it done. So please pay attention to that. The other thing I want to
Speaking of clocks, do we just determine whether the clocks are running in each car, or we just ignore that?
Okay, when I say watch the clock, I'm talking about the clock
I
to
understand,
get
but
done.
this
Now,
is the clock in the car. Does that
Yeah.
have to be running and operative?
we expect that the instruments, all these stuff in the car is going to work. And so it is absolutely fair game to look at the car's clock and see if it's working. And if it's not working, you can deduct for that. Now, if you do that, look at every car in your class and make sure you're consistent in the way you do it. But yeah, absolutely, we expect it to run. It's within the realm of possibilities. You could even, check all the lights and start the car. Now, what I found, or have the entrance start the car, don't do that yourself. But what I found though is that I always feel very time crunched in getting the concourse judging done. And so, I don't usually check the lights. I don't usually try to start the car or anything like, have them start the car or anything like that. But sure, everything's expected to work properly. So yeah, you can certainly, it's deficient if the clock doesn't work. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention here, don't be the judge that's out to get the entrant on some oolies or something like that. Remember, we want the entrant to come back next time. And so, entrants can be very sensitive about their car. I recall a time that I think Joe was president and I was doing a exterior and I didn't even take off for it. I mentioned to a person that had 129. It was an SL 500 129. It had an AMG badge on the back of it. Didn't even take off for it. Just mentioned that, they really didn't build any with the AMG badge over there. Oh boy. And I got, our president got a complaint about me on that. And I didn't even take off for it. So yeah, and some entrants could be very, very sensitive and you have to watch the way you say things about their car. All right, so when in doubt about authenticity, well, you can certainly ask the entrant, tell me about that. But also go ask the chief judge, have your team leader go ask the chief judge on it. And the chief judge might make a ruling on it. But if you ask the entrant and the entrant gives you some reasonable explanation, give the entrant the benefit of the doubt. If you're not absolutely certain that it's unauthentic, then give the entrant the benefit of the doubt. I mean, if you're an expert on that particular area and then fine, it's not authentic. But give the entrant the benefit of the doubt. Remember, we do want them to come back. Don't judge a class that your car is in, especially a car that you're in. Try to avoid judging a close friend's car if you can. That's hard to do. And that's really kind of a chief judge's thing, but it's very hard to coordinate that. Always provide comment about what the deduction is for. Always, always, always. That way the entrant can learn and improve. And also it improves transparency. So the entrant feels like they've been dealt a fair hand. If you see a safety issue, immediately tell the entrant. Safety issues that I've seen are like tires that have sidewall cracks in them or that are really, really old, leaks that are really significant leaks, things like that. You really ought to tell the entrant that if it's a safety issue. And sometimes you get an entrant that's just, while you're judging, asking you lots and lots of questions, and it interferes with your ability to judge the car. And you just ask them to nicely step away and tell them that you'll answer all the questions after you're judging, but you really have to get the judging done. Okay. And be very tactful in that, though. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we don't give extra points for displays, magazine articles, photos, trophies, all that stuff. And we should not expect them to be displayed at our concours. You also don't go back to a vehicle to rescore it. That's why it's really important to do it right the first time, be consistent, and don't go back. You also don't go off and ask one of the other judges or one of the other teams to judge something for you. I mean, that's another violation of the basic consistency rule. You've got to have the same eyes looking at the same things on the entire class of cars. that also means that as the chief judge, you don't have two different judging teams splitting a class of cars, because you will not get consistent judging that way. And one of the worst things you can do as a judge is, make snide comments about the car, especially within earshot of the entrant. You shouldn't be making snide comments about any of the cars, but especially where the entrant can hear. We're after a pleasant day. We want the entrant to enjoy it, and we want them to come back. So we don't do things like that. We want to thank them for bringing their cars. Okay. And I've already mentioned, you don't make other teams aware of a flaw outside of your judging assignment. If, you don't see irate entrants very often, but, leave that to chief judge or the concourse chair to deal with. Seen that probably once. And of course, you can't judge your own vehicle. You can't judge vehicles in the class that you have entered. And that's why as head judge, it's important to know who's got cars entered, so you assign the team so you're not judging your own cars. But if you see in a judge's meeting that you're assigned to judge a class that your car is in, you've got to bring it to the attention of the head judge so that your judging assignment can be changed. And again, consistency is absolutely vital. Right? And let me tell you my perspective on consistency. How do you achieve consistency? Well, obviously, you take the same amount off of the same deficiency. But how do you do that? Well, one, you judge the cars in the same condition. So, they're all top up or top on, windows up. But you judge the same characteristics. As I mentioned the battery a couple of times, if some cars have the battery in the trunk and some cars have the battery in the engine compartment, and if you look at the score sheet, batteries are judged in the engine compartment, and if it's not in the engine compartment, then there's nothing to judge there. And it's not fair to try to take off on some cars because you can see the battery, and others you can't see the battery, so you just don't judge the battery. And there's other characteristics like that change in the model run. So judge the same characteristics. Now, judge in the same order. Use the score sheet as a guide to where you put your eyes and what you look at. And, I try to have a consistent set of movements. I try to, if I'm judging engine compartments, start at the left side of the car, look at what I can see from the left side of the car, then position myself center line in front of the car, judge what I can see there, and then position myself at right side of the car and try to look at the same things. Consistency is absolutely vital. And you do that by trying to put your eyes in the same place on all of the cars. And going back to my comments about the first car is really, really important. You've got to be really, really thorough at looking at things at the first car. You just don't want to get to car number 3 and say, gee, I see that on this car. Did I look at that on the previous car? You don't want to be in that position. So you've got to be very thorough in the first car to ensure that you're going to be consistent. Okay, this is a good place to answer some questions. Let me see what we've got over here. I've got to look at the Cocoa Mats thing, because I remember Cocoa Mats I had in my first sports car, but I was not aware that they were a factory option. I'll have to go back and look at that. Okay, Mike Perry asked, generally the judging consistency is within single concours and could differ between events. Judge clock, Peachtree event. Well, I would expect you to judge everything on the instrument panel. And so, I would expect you to judge the clock at all the events. But let's talk about consistency from event to event. If you look in the rule book, for a local event, for a regional event, you can deviate from what's in the rule book. For a national event, you're supposed to be playing by exactly what's in the rule book. So there could be some local variations in the way things are judged. For example, the last one we did in June, we did a top-down concours. And so we had all convertibles and we judged them with the top-down. That's not normally what you do, but it was kind of a neat idea. So we decided to give that a try. So
Gary, the example would be if Peachtree decides that if the clock is not working, that's okay, no deduction, as an example. But that same car we're taking to the Dallas chapter and they think that the clock should be working.
Well, I don't think there's really a place to disagree on that. The clock's supposed to be working. I mean, so, yeah.
Okay, so you would deduct, so there should be consistency there. is
Yeah,
what you're
there
saying.
should be consistency there, but you have to look at the clock on every car. And if you've got a class, I think it's probably conceivable that you could have a class of cars where some of the cars you could easily see the clock and some of them it's, not visible. You can't judge the clock. But yeah, the clock's supposed to be working. I mean, everything's in the car is supposed to be working. Okay. Speaking of safety, do we deduct for tires date coded older than 10 years but show no excessive wear? That's an excellent question. And I thought, first remember that, well, I should say remember, we haven't gone on the scorecard yet. The tires are only in chassis. And so you actually you're not judging the tires except in show category in the first place. Would I take off for a tire that was over 10 years old, but showed no other deficiencies? No, I don't think I would do that. I would probably point out to the owner that he probably ought to throw the tires away. But no, I probably wouldn't take away for that. Can each member of the team use a written score sheet for each car we judge and have the team leader put all entries into the tablet when each is completed? We had trouble with tablets at our last concourse. Yes, that is an acceptable way for doing it. And I normally, even when we're planning to do computerized scoring, I normally have a pile of paper score sheets just in case. Let's see, is there anything else I missed? Okay, undercarriage inspection only for show, correct. Getting a little bit ahead of things, but you're right. Underbody's not done for street category. Underbody's not done for show and shine. And okay. And that back to the discussion of dealer installed options. Yeah, I was saying pagodas do not come with air conditioning, and lots of the dealers installed AC as an option, and a dealer installed AC in a pagoda is fine. And I've got some pictures of what those look like. All right, let's move on to talking about score sheet. Now, our score sheets are 100-point score sheets. So the perfect car with no deficiencies will have 100 points. Deficiencies are deducted for in quarter-point increments. And on a show category score sheet, there are 5 categories. There's paint and coach work, there's interior, there's engine compartment, lights, glass, rubber, and chrome trim, and chassis. Now on the show category, and this is the difference, the key difference between show and street, is instead of doing chassis, which you do in show category, street uses those 8 points for a mileage bonus of up to 4 points and an age bonus of up to 4 points. Now, everywhere except for in the paint area and when it gets down to color, even in the paint area, emphasis is on authenticity and condition. Now, when we look here at the scorecard, what you're going to see is there's very little points in there about dirt, cleanliness, and corrosion. So, this is not a competition about who has the cleanest car. Now, the cars that win are clean, but the emphasis is on authenticity and the condition of the car. And they're combined in each category. So for a 2-point area, half of that is for authenticity and half of that is for condition. And we expect the replacement parts to be Mercedes-Benz OEM parts. Now, realistically, most places you can't see whether it's an OEM Mercedes part or not, but there are places where you can see. Most notably is coolant hoses very often have the 3-pointed star on them and all that. All right, so let's talk about scorecards. I'm going to show you this scorecard. What I'm going to do is I'm going to magnify areas on the scorecard. This is a street class, or street category scorecard. And I'm going to magnify here this area first. Okay, the first area I want to look at is interior upholstery trunk. I see upholstery spelled wrong on that. I missed that. Okay, anyway, so if you look at this, there's 22 points here. There's 22 points in this area. And so it causes you to look at all these pieces if you go down the scorecard. The carpeting is 2 points, the seat coverings, foundations, paddings, 4 points, and so on. And what you see on these scorecards is most areas are either 2 point or 1 point, with a few points. The larger areas, the seats, coverings, foundations, padding are 4 points. The dash, instrument, radio, glove box, center console, and that's a big area, is 3 points. Headliner, soft top, sun visor, inside mirrors, 3 points. Everything else is 1 or 2. And notice the dirt, dust, corrosion, stains, it's 1 point. Okay, so it's not just about cleanliness, it's about condition and authenticity. And so moving, I've got to change my magnifier here. Moving over to glass, lights, rubber, and trim, the next area. Oh, I need to redo that. There. Okay, glass, lights, rubber, and trim. You see there's a total of 20 points here. Everything's 1 or 2 points except for grille, emblem, front bumper, and bumper guards, and doors, seals, and door handles. Everything else is just 2 points or 1 point. And looking here, it's the headlights, it's the windshield. Notice windshield wipers are nowhere on the scorecard. And so I'd probably stick windshield wipers under windshield. There's a few things that don't show up on the scorecard, and then you need to kind of figure out where you're going to put them and then be consistent about where you're going to put them. Okay, let's go over to the next area. Come out of that.
Gary, well, while we're on that, may I ask a question? Windshield wipers is an example. This will cover them all. If it's a 2 wiper car and they're obviously Goodyear wipers, not Mercedes OEM wipers, is that a 1/4 point deduction for windshield wipers, or a 1/2 point because you got 2 of them that are out of thing?
Well, here's the
And
way
the same thing with the door seals and door handles. If the driver's side rubber on the car is loose, that's a 1/4 point. But if all the doors are loose, is that a whole point? In other words, how do you accumulate irregularities within a?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that in a lot of my examples. And let me give you a basic answer that's not specific to that particular area of the car. The basic answer here is that you look at the area of the car. Let's say you just mentioned windshield seal trim. Let's say we're putting wipers in there. That whole area is worth 2 points. And so the amount you deduct for what you see needs to be appropriate in proportion to the whole area. So let's say, since it's windshield seal and trim, the windshield's in great condition. The seal around the windshield is good, black, unbroken. The trim around the windshield is nice and chrome and shiny. It doesn't have any deficiencies in it. But you have a windshield wiper, 2 windshield wipers that are not Mercedes OEM windshield wipers. But it's certainly at least a 1/4 point deduction. Would you do a 1/2 point deduction? Well, let's think about that. It's a 2 point area. 1 point of that is for authenticity. 1 point of that's condition. We've already said everything is in great condition. So we only have 1 point to play with for authenticity. But we've got an authentic windshield. We've got authentic seal. We've got authentic trim and unauthentic windshield wipers. And so you only have 1 point to play with. And so, yeah, it's probably a 1/4 point. So you have to kind of do that thought process to not over penalize things. And that's
And like the sticker on the windshield, it could be a OEM windshield that was replaced, but it didn't get the signature sticker on the windshield.
Sure. I mean, that could happen.
When you catch.
Yeah, just don't over penalize. And it's really, it would be very, very easy to over penalize if you just do a 1/4 on this wiper and a 1/4 on this wiper, and suddenly you're taking off too much points for the area. I mean, that's really the point I'm trying to emphasize, be consistent the way you do it. So if you see the same thing on two different cars, take off the same amount, and don't over penalize. Make sure what you take off is in proportion to the amount of points on the score sheet for it. Okay.
So a clean windshield which doesn't have the TriStar would lose a quarter point.
Sure. But probably no more.
Yeah, I would take off for not having the sticker too.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Okay, let's go to the back side of this scorecard. Let me do a little bit of magnifying here. Okay, engine compartment. Now, the engine compartment, notice everything is either 1 or 2. There's a lot of stuff, but there's nothing with the big point areas like some of the others. And I often just use this scorecard to guide the way I place my eyes. But there's a lot of stuff here. The other thing I want to point out is the newer the cars are, the less things that you can see in the engine compartment. And one of the weaknesses I've seen when classes are combined, sometimes you end up with cars that have a very covered up engine in a same class with cars that have, an engine that you can see everything on, which is one reason I really, really don't like to combine classes. But if you are in that situation, you're assigned to judge a class like that, you have to not judge, well, let me put it this way. If you can't see very much of the engine on some of the cars, then don't take off for those things on the engine that you can't see on the other car. It would not be fair. And a big example of that is if you lump together 124s and say 107s in one class. 107s, you can see the engine. As you go through 124s, they get more and more covered. And there's things you cannot see. Or if you lump 129s and 107s together in a class, 129 engines are relatively covered, 107 engines are just out there. And if you just take away points for everything you see on 107, the 129s are always going to win that class. So you've got to be very careful if you end up in that situation, not to over penalize cars because they're more visible. Okay, and that's a consistency issue in my mind. And that's why I really don't like to combine classes. Okay, now one of the things you notice is that there's nothing on air cleaner in here. And it's very easy to have a deficiency on the air cleaner. So you have to decide where you're going to put the air cleaner. I would probably put it in miscellaneous items not covered. And do we have a question in here about belts, right? Yeah, Ed Talent has a question about V and serpentine belts from Continental went from yellow to white, yellow meaning original Mercedes. How to judge the white ones? Hey, I think if it's Continental, I'd probably be fine with that. If it's Gates, I think I'd have a problem with it. Okay, so let's go to the other part of the scorecard here. These little magnifying glass. All right, paint and coach work. Paint and coach work is a little different because a lot of this is not authenticity and condition. It's how well, what the gaps in the doors look like and how well the paint's been taken care of and such. But notice there's a 5-point area in here, imperfections in paint, and the coach lines and sight lines are 4 points. Quality of body work is 3 points. So this is a little bit different from the other areas on the scorecard. And I'm going to cover some examples of what you're looking for in this, but I want to acquaint you with the scorecard. Also, look at the bottom of the scorecard. There's notes. And so there's some things you just don't have to memorize because it's on the scorecard. Like that rule at the bottom, light alloy wheels may be substituted if they were available as a factory option. Deduct a ½ point for non-conforming wheels. And that means that if you got a car that has a set of wheels on it that were available as an option on that car, that's okay. If they were never available as an option on the car, it's a ½ point deduction. If the color of the car has been changed, it's a ½ point deduction unless it's changed to a color that Mercedes actually used for that year of car, in which case it's only a ½ point. Realistically, you're probably not even going to pick up on that unless there's some deficiency in the way it was done. I mean, usually when I'm doing concourse judging, I'm not running paint codes to see if it's the right color as it was originally delivered in. Although you could certainly do that if you wanted to. I feel that time constraints usually tell me not to do that. And unless the car was really, really done well, you can usually see if there's been a color change done. Okay, anyway. So let me go over to, and come out of magnify, and let's see. That was the street category score sheet. I'm just going to mention that the mileage is considered in street category, and there is a mileage bonus of a point for every 50,000 miles, and there's a age bonus, a point for every 5 years of age, up to 4 points per. And so this scorecard has 92 points on it, and then there's an extra 8 points bonus for age and for mileage. Now we get over to the show category scorecard, and all of those places I've just gone over, the engine compartment, the paint coach work, the interior upholstery trunk, glass lights, rubber, and chrome trim are all the same. The only difference on this scorecard, that did not do what I wanted. Okay, let me magnify this and show you. The only difference is there's a chassis and underbody section here. All the areas in chassis and underbody are only 1 point. And there's only 8 points in chassis and underbody. And honestly, you can't see half the stuff in most cars anyway. And so I really encourage people to go into show category. They're not going to lose a lot. Note there's only 1 point in here for dirt, corrosion, and leaks. And so I like to judge chassis and underbody. I like to encourage people to enter show category instead of street. The benefit, the nice thing about street, since we have the 4 points of bonus for mileage and 4 points of bonus for age potentially, if you do the math for that and carry all the digits, you will never have a tie if you carry that out to a couple of digits, because you divide, say, 52,000 miles by 50,000 miles per point, and you get 1.0 something 00. No two cars are going to come up with the same bonus points there. So you should never have a tie in street category. Judges do not like ties.
Them out to at least 3 decimal places. If you're doing it manually, do it to 3 decimal places.
Yeah, 3 decimal places is a good choice for that. Okay. And
Yeah,
so
a really good question here about OEM parts are becoming, I think it means not available, right?
yeah, let me find that question. Where is that? Okay. Yeah, here's I would not worry so much. The question is that more OEM parts are becoming no longer available. How will that be dealt with? Well, I mean, just judge the car. One, you can't see in most cases in the car, you can't tell whether it's an OEM part or not. For those that you can, you penalize it when it's not OEM. But realize that if it's not available, everyone's going to have the same problem. And all the cars are going to end up having a non-original part, and they're all going to get that 1/4 point off. And so it's not going to be a definitive show winner or show losing item. And the other thing that happens is Classic Center starts producing more of the older parts. So for some ages of cars, more parts are becoming no longer available. For some ages of cars, more parts that used to be non-available are becoming available. And so it kind of changes, but the Concours rules don't change. But every competitor is faced with that issue. And so it ought to equalize things out. Okay. All right. So I've talked through this one already. Oh, I just didn't mention, if you trailer the car to the show in street category, you get 2 points deduction. That's a penalty. Okay. Unless it's a car that's not street legal and has to be trailered. And I've already talked through all that. Okay, let's talk about custom a little bit. Now, custom, I think custom is important. I mean, and you might call it modified, but I think this is a really important area, because I think we need to be attracting people that have cars that are somewhat changed from the way they came from the factory. and give them an option of showing in a concourse. And so there's a category. This has been in the rule book forever. We did not change this when we rewrote the rule book. We just provided a custom category scorecard. So it's very much similar to the street category scorecard in that there's 92 points, chassis not judged, but there's a 4-point bonus each for workmanship and for presentation. And so it becomes somewhat subjective, and you don't judge any aspect of authenticity. So you're splitting the points between cleanliness and condition. I encourage folks running concours to run this category. It's a good way to get people involved who would otherwise not be involved because the car is penalized so heavily because it's different from the way it comes from the factory. So, I mean, I really like this category, and I encourage you to do it. Okay, so now I'm going to go through areas and talk about what you might see, and then try to calibrate a little bit on how many points to take off. Diana, do you think we need a break, or should we go? What do you think?
I think we should keep going.
Okay, all right, we'll do that. Okay, so for interior upholstery and trunk, this is some of the things you might see. Now, cracked dash, I mean, some of the cars are more likely to have cracked dashes than others, and you don't see a lot of concours cars with a cracked dash, but you do have to look for it. You know, instruments are discolored. Some of the cars have chrome bezels around the instruments, and the plating starts to get kind of bad on those. Heater control levers is an interesting one, because you get to the 60s and early 70s cars, and they tend to have 4 horizontal levers on the dash, and they get stuck. And people try to move them and put too much force on them, and they break the ends of the levers off. And so it's not unusual to see a car with all the levers broken off or one lever broken off, and you need to look for that. It's especially hard to see if all 4 of them are broken off, because it might look normal. Aftermarket radios are often seen, or speaker installations. That's certainly penalized. The wood finishes, especially on the the 90s cars, you'll probably find cracks in the wood finish. Sun visors, 107s are really kind of famous for sun visors that kind of lose their shape because of the padding kind of falling apart inside them. Headliner stains, glue if the top's been changed, incorrect upholstery changes, and you see this. It's not unusual to have a car's driver's seat upholstery changed and not the passenger seat, or have the front seat upholstery changed and not the back seat. And so you pick that up because it doesn't quite match. It should match the original upholstery. The condition of original upholstery. Leather tends to crack with age and get nice and shiny, and that's a patina. That's okay. If the leather cracks such that you see through the color and see the original color of the leather, that's a deficiency. Different carpets. I mean, I've got one car that's supposed to have rubber matting in the trunk, and I've actually got a carpet in it. That's a deficiency. Condition of carpet, trunk floor and side panel finish, spare tire and jack condition, and toolkit. And let me mention, well, toolkit, you asked to see the toolkit. First aid kit. Now, cars before about 1972 didn't have first aid kits. And the other piece of that is that there is a first aid kit delete option. I've got a car or two that have that option. So if you don't see the first aid kit, that's a good one to ask the entrant, tell me about the first aid kit. And he might say, it's got the first aid kit delete option. And I've actually gotten penalized for that in the concours before, for a car that had a first aid kit delete option.
How would they know? If you buy a used car, how would you know if it was meant to have a first aid kit?
You can get the build sheet offline. It's cheap. It costs you nothing. You put your VIN number in, and the build sheet will tell you whether it was supplied with a first aid kit. And
the older cars, though, a lot of them aren't there, Sam.
right.
The build sheets aren't there for some of the newer cars after maybe
Are they
1990.
they're not there?
Yeah, they're not there. I mean, I think before 1990, they're not online.
Oh, okay.
So you might not know, but sometimes even when you buy a used car, you'll find the build sheet like stuck in the owner's manual or something.
Right.
Okay, this is where I think I dropped. Is this where I dropped?
I think so. I think so, Gary.
All right, so this is an example of the some stains on the top, and here's some pictures of things that are not deficient. This is a shot of the seat with some patina, with some cracks. These cracks are perfectly fine because they do not go through the color. A radio, good wood, neat label on the top release here. Okay. Okay, now here's one with more issues. I mentioned these 4 levers. This has a knob broken off here. It's got an aftermarket radio. Note, is the clock working? And the AC here is not the right dealer installed option for this car. And what on a Pagoda, what does a dealer installed optional acceptable AC look like? Well, it kind of looks like this. It's either a Frigid King or a Coolmeister. And the way you recognize these is that these units are vent, panel, vent, panel, vent. And notice the Frigid King is also vent, panel, vent, panel, vent. And some of the ones that weren't the original dealer installed options don't have that configuration. So that's kind of your key when you see these on a Pagoda. All right, so let's talk about what we're seeing here. And the point I want to make here is using the score sheet, you look at your area, and this area we're going to look at is going to be the steering wheel, gear shift, signal stalks. And if you look at the score sheet, that has a maximum of 2 points. And the point I want to make here is you can't over deduct as you're looking at these. There's 3 things here: steering wheel, the turn signal, and the gear shift. And if you look at this steering wheel, well, it's got a aftermarket wrapper on it. It's got a crack right here. You probably can't see it very well, but the chrome on the horn ring is really kind of pitted. Well, and there's a deficiency here in the pad. So if you were to just say a 1/4 point for the crack, a 1/4 point for the non-authentic cover, a 1/4 point for the chrome ring, a 1/4 point for the bump here, then suddenly you're taking off a full point in a 2-point area, and you haven't even looked at the gear shift, and you haven't even looked at the turn signal yet. And so that's probably excessive. So you always have to take off in proportion to that area. This is a 2-point area. That means there's 1 point for authenticity and 1 point for condition. You've got an authenticity deficiency because of the leather wrap. Okay, so that's a 1/4 point. You've got some conditions deficiencies, but you can't just take off for everything or you'll be overdoing it. So, you might, deduct maybe a 1/4 point for, well, it's certainly a 1/4 point for the wrap and maybe a 1/4 point for the crack and, maybe another 1/4 point, but don't overdo it. Always be thinking about how much the area is worth and how you have to spread it out. And I think this becomes most apparent for dash, because if you look at that area on the scorecard, it's dash, instruments, radio, glove box, center console, and it's maximum 3 points. There's a lot of stuff in there. And so you've got to be very careful not to over deduct, especially on the dashboard one. Okay, let's move on to the paint and coach work. Stone chips. Well, almost all cars are going to have stone chips. Lower front valence tends to get stone chips and then get a little rusty. And of course, the front fenders get some chips. And fit on the panels. Look at how the lines line up. You know that when a Mercedes came from the factory, all the panel lines were perfect. I mean, the gaps were all the same. If it either was in an accident and wasn't repaired quite perfectly or restored, some restoration shops are better than others. If you see the gaps, compare the left side gap to the right side gap on the hood, the front door to the back door gap, because they were perfect when they came from the factory. See if they're still perfect. Sight down the fender lines. Now, the paint color change, if you pick up on this, and you know, a lot of the times I wouldn't pick up on this, but the color change is a half a point deduction unless it's an okay color. Mercedes actually used that color in that year on that car. Now, orange peel. I'm going to show you a picture of orange peel. It's hard to, if you haven't seen orange peel before on paint, it kind of looks like an orange peel. And one thing I have noticed is that when you start to get up to the 1990s, mid 1990s and newer, the factory finish actually has orange peel in it. And so, you know, the 60s cars, the 70s cars, the paint was perfect from the factory. The 95 and earlier or so, you will see orange peel. And so, you know, you're judging, say, 129s. That is the SL from 90 to 2001, you're going to see orange peel in those cars, and it's not deficient because that's the way it came from the factory. But what you'll see, you know, if say you're judging a 1960s car that's been restored and been repainted, what you are likely to see is a perfect paint finish in the places that you can get to easily. In the places that are harder to buff, you might see orange peel, say, under the headlights or around the headlights or someplace like that. So be looking for that. And of course, if the paint has been on the car for quite a while, you know, it might have been burned with a buffer or have scratch marks in it, swirl marks. It's very useful to just stand back and look at the reflection to see if there's any, you know, any dents in the car or dings or things like that. Okay, here's a picture of orange peel. And I'm not talking about the cracks in here. That's body work that has some Bondo under it. But up here in the corner, you see where the light's reflecting and it's not a smooth reflection. I mean, that's orange peel. Okay. And so here's some examples. This is a left fender, left hood versus right hood, and the gaps are different. And the Mercedes do not come with chrome strips here, so it's deficient to have that chrome strip. It also, I mean, it kind of protects the edge from getting dinged, but whenever you have this kind of chrome strip added to the car, it usually promotes rust under it, and that gets penalized. On pagodas, for those of you that aren't familiar with pagodas, a lot of the times this little mark is missing, and this is on the inside of the headlights. On a pagoda, the left and right headlight chrome surrounds are the same. On the fender has a accent line on the outside, and to make it match on the inside, they all have this little notch. Now, a restorer that doesn't understand the cars will often eliminate this little line. And I remember, I think Hilton had a couple of years ago, there were 3 pagodas, 2 of them didn't have this line. And so that's the first thing I look at every time I see a pagoda, to see if they were religious about maintaining these notches in the headlight. The wheel covers and paint, the wheel covers are in paint and coachwork. It's 1 point. And if you look at the wheel cover here, this is chrome, and Mercedes typically has this area painted car color. There are some of the cars that have contrasting colors, but they didn't deliver this, to the best of my knowledge, with unpainted chrome. Okay, this is an example of sighting down the line for and this is a 600. It's a very nice car, and you see how this body line is perfect. You also have to look for deficiencies in the side of the car. You really have to do a reflection and see how the reflection looks. Note also, this is one of the few Mercedes that actually came with a chrome lip over the fender. And so the 600 has the chrome lip over the fender. The 300 SE Coupe and convertible from 62 to 67 had it. The 300 SC from 56 to 58 had it. And the 220S and SE Coupe or convertible from 56 to 61 had it. And that's it. So what you often see is a 450 SL or a 107 chassis that has those chrome lips, and that is not correct and should be penalized.
Gary, a couple good questions here about the change in interior color. Is it treated the same as the change in the paint color? I know.
The rule book is mute on that. if you actually are able to pick up on it, yeah, it should be. If it's done well, you'll probably never pick up on it. You'd have to cross the, the option code.
Okay, yeah, and the other one is clear film, expel clear film. I mean, I guess we'd see this on newer cars, not.
And the new cars have a clear film. If it came from the factory with the clear film, it's fine. Are they coming from the factory with the clear film, or is the dealer putting that on? That's really a question I have. If it's a dealer installed item, then it's not allowed by the rule book and it's deficient. But you got to think about the other side of that, because the clear film prevents things like stone chips, and you're not going to have deficiencies on stone chips because the film prevented it. And so, you're probably better off with a 1/4 point deduction versus a couple of 1/4 point deductions for stone chips.
Yeah, Daniel's saying that, that the dealer's doing it.
Yeah, it's an extra profit center for the dealer. But,
Oh, it'd be a 1/4 point to end. I mean, it's minor, I'll take a 1/4 point versus having stone chips on my car, right?
yeah, exactly. Okay, so were there other questions? I lost that question window when I had to restart.
Yeah, no, we're good, I think.
Okay. All right, so it's getting hard to find a original Mercedes hardtop as the cars get older. The original tops have this embossed in the window on the 107s and some of the other cars. And so we defined in the rule book that if the top looks like it has the right material, looks correct, except it's missing that little embossed thing, then it's a 1/4 point deduction. We always had discussions on how much to take off for that, so we just defined it. Okay, this is an example of a safety issue. This is tire cracking, and this is a date code of 2007, which is really too old and should be thrown away. And this is an example of something I would bring to the entrance attention immediately. Okay, let me do a magnifier because I think this is hard to see. This isn't a body line example here. Now, or door gap. Notice the door gap up here is bigger than the door gap back here. And in fact, this car, depending on your color resolution of your monitor, I think that this fender is a different shade than the door as well. So I think this car's probably been in an accident. And contrast it with the other side of the car. I mean, I've got to come at a magnify here. The other side of the car, see how good the door gaps are on this one? This side doesn't look as good. So how much would you take off for that? Okay, you're in paint and coach work. You're in the line of gaps, doors, hood, deck lid, which is a 2 points max. So it's the rear door gap. So that's probably a 1/4 point. And if you think the paint color didn't match, that area is a 2 point max. And so, maybe 1/4 point for that. And if you're really looking closely, you'll notice it appears to be missing a lug bolt on the front wheel. That's a 1 point area, wheels and wheel covers. And so I'd probably take a 1/4 point off for that. And, that's kind of a safety issue. So I might mention that to the owner as well. Now this one, you're looking down the side of the car and you're looking at the reflection. And notice there's a ding here and there's a ding here. Now you're in an area of quality of body work, I think, and that's an area of maximum 3 points. And so, maybe you take off a 1/4 point for each door ding, maybe. But if you look at this particular car, this car has a lot of door dings. You can't just go and take a 1/4 point, 1/4 point, 1/4 point, 1/4 point, because you'll be way above the area where it makes sense. And so you've always got to returning to the theme of you've got to deduct an amount that's appropriate for the area. So a car with a bunch of door dings with otherwise really good quality body work, I wouldn't take off more than, a couple of 1/4 point deductions, even if it had lots of door dings. Okay. Chassis. And I encourage you to do chassis. I mean, there's only 8 points in chassis and only 1 point of it's dirt. So you don't lose a lot by doing show category and judging chassis. So what do you judge? Okay. Well, the finish of the suspension, the springs, the color code, most Mercedes springs are going to have color codes on them. Condition of the shocks, corrosion, leaks, corrosion on the drive shaft, if you can see the drive shaft, and you're not going to be able to see the drive shaft on a lot of the cars. The flex disc, you're not going to be able to see the flex discs on a lot of the cars. Of course, the exhaust system, you can probably see the condition of the donuts that support the exhaust system. The wheel wells. Let me mention wheel wells. Now, Mercedes went from, the 50s cars that probably are going to have a black finish in the wheel well. You get to an area 60s, 70s, 80s, a lot of the wheel wells in there are body color. And then you get to a period where there's gray undercoating. And so the key there is you're seeing, say you're judging a 1990s 124 car and you've got black wheel wells. That probably means that somebody sprayed black undercoating under there after some type of repair. So you need to be very suspicious if you see black undercoating on something other than a 1950s Mercedes. All right, and oil leaks, of course. And I mentioned earlier, do the lowest car first. If you have a Geländewagen, you can probably see all these things. If you've got my 124 that's lowered, you can't see a lot of this stuff. And if you can't see it on one car, then you shouldn't be judging it on the others for consistency's sake. Here's some just chassis pictures. This shows color codes on the spring. And this also shows kind of the color of this wheel well. And this is a muffler with some rust on it and a suspension arm that has some paint chipping off. So everything in the chassis area is 1 point. And so the exhaust system, 1 point, remember, half is authenticity, half is condition. And so there's only a half a point in there for condition. And there's some rust on it. It doesn't have rust holes. It's mostly there, but it's got some rust on it. So, maybe it's a 1/4 point off. And you got paint flaking off the suspension arm. There's only 1 point in the whole thing for suspension. And again, it's condition and authenticity. It's authentic. It's got some paint chipping off. So that's probably 1/4 point.
I've got a question here in chat about chrome muffler tips. Are they authentic?
Well, it depends. I mean, some of the cars have chrome muffler chips and some of them don't. And so, and I can't tell you which ones do and which ones don't. Although, you're doing a line of cars and you see some that have chrome muffler chips and some that don't, and that will cause you to ask that question. But, the AMG cars very often have chrome muffler chips, for example. Others may or may not. I think that varies. I don't know a overall blanket answer for that. I mean, if it's not original with the car, it's penalized. Okay. And anyway, so let's shift over to glass, lights, rubber, and chrome trim. And so what might you see here? Well, the plastic grill inserts often get cracked or discolored. Cracked headlight door, and on a Mercedes, the term headlight door is that piece of plastic that's kind of between the headlight and the headlight mounting area. And they often get crazed or cracked or discolored. European headlights, and I mentioned earlier in answer to a question, in street category, European headlights are okay. In show category, European headlights are only okay if it was a European spec car. Of course, headlights match. Sometimes a car will get in an accident and you'll have a new headlight on one side and not a new headlight on the other. And the fit and finish, the fit of the lenses can often be an issue, especially on cars that have been restored or repaired. The window seal, the rubber window seal will very often have cracks in it. Windshield, you usually see a Mercedes 3-pointed star on the windshield, and they will almost always have a decal in the lower right that has a signature on it. Those decals have changed through the years, and I would expect it to be the right decal for the years of the windshield. But you'll find that, for example, 124s and 129s have the same decal because they come from the same year. And as the car gets newer, the windshield decal gets more and more transparent. Fender lip chrome, I've mentioned the cars that actually have it. If it's on a car that's not supposed to have it, it's penalized. This rubber gets discolored. Look for overspray on the chrome. Door seal, Joe mentioned cracks in the door seals already. Fit of rear lights. The rear lights on a lot of Mercedes tend to be kind of horizontal, and very often you see that they're not really horizontal like they're supposed to be. They're not quite in there right, especially on a car that's had an accident repair. Of course, the lenses can crack. If you can see inside the bumpers, you wouldn't expect there to be paint. Bumper overriders are supposed to be there on the American spec cars. The European spec cars don't usually have them. Antenna issues and discoloration of rubber and plastic. And let's go to some pictures. Okay, this is another wonderful 600. The light looks really appropriate here, and note it also has a chrome fender liner here. Now this is a 280 SE, as you can see by the label here, and it's got a chrome fender liner in it, which it's not supposed to have. This is a car, notice European headlights, US bumper. In street category, that's okay. In show category, that's penalized. And his hood gap doesn't look very good either, although I really need to be standing center line in front of the car to see if the left hood gap and the right hood gap match it. So let's look at this car. All right, this is a 1985 380 SL. And you're doing paint and body work. So what do we see here? Well, we see a pinstripe. The pinstripe is fine. Okay, we've specifically authorized pinstripes. The other thing we see is these chrome fender liners, and it's on a lot of 107s. And they really shouldn't be, because they promote rust under the fender liners. And so you're in the area of side trim, antenna, side mirrors, and there's only 2 points there. Okay, one of those points is condition, one's originality. Okay, so if assuming everything else is okay, we've got an originality issue here. And so, you might say, well, I'm going to do 1/4 each, and there are 4 of them. But if you did that, you'd be taking off too many points. And so, maybe you could do a 1/4 point. You could argue that a 1/2 point would be okay, but no more than that. And also, whether you choose a 1/4 point or a 1/2 point, be consistent the next time you see a car in that class that has that deficiency. Okay, engine compartment, which is honestly my favorite place. Now, leaks, you certainly can see leaks. Fan clutch assembly, rust on the water. Most of the aluminum pieces, if the owner hasn't actually wiped them down, will have some type of corrosion on the aluminum. And it's easy to wipe off. I use WD-40 on that usually just to wipe it off. The fan belts we mentioned, we expect to see Continental or some Mercedes brand, not a Gates belt, a US belt. Intake manifolds often have fuel stains on them. Exhaust manifolds, every 107 has a corroded exhaust manifold. I think they might have come from the factory that way. I don't know, but brake boosters, and look under and see if the brake master cylinder is ever leaked. There'll probably be some paint that's been lifted under the brake master cylinder. I'm not sure you'd ever tell a replacement engine block, or most Mercedes engine blocks are pretty benign color. If it's red like a Ford, that might stand out to you. Air filter, chipped, dent, wing nuts missing, or overshined. For the M117 engine cars that have a chrome air filter, I've seen where aluminum air filter, they're not particularly shiny when they came from the factory. And some people actually shine them up, and excessively shiny aluminum parts is a deficiency, since it didn't come from the factory that way in most cases. Okay, I've seen batteries that don't have hold downs. You're supposed to have a appropriate battery for the car, which, since they were shipped with Mercedes batteries in most cases, I'm expecting to see a Mercedes battery. Mercedes ignition wires are typically gray or black, and so blue ignition wires, for example, are a deficiency. You don't expect to see fuel stains or corrosion. It's hard to see collapsed engine mounts on most cars, but if you could tell, that would be a deficiency. It is pretty easy to see firewall grommets, especially on Pagodas and 107s, and you don't expect them to be split. I mentioned over polishing aluminum and hood pad. Hood pads are a challenge because it's the heat environment causes them to detach if you don't use the right glue. So look at them carefully. When the hood is open, it's easy to just not pay attention to the bottom of the hood, but that's part of what you're judging. You have to make yourself look at it. And of course, yellow cad finish. That's the cadmium plating. There's a corrosion resistant plating that's often on fuel lines on older Mercedes. And after a while, it chips off. And so that would be deficient. And sometimes people try to replicate it and don't do a very good job on it. So it's really not the right color. And that's deficient. Hose clamps is what I see the most. Now, Mercedes hose clamps are closed hose clamps. That is, the band, you can't see the hose through the band. And we have the deficient one, we call Yankee clamps, which is what you see on typical American cars, where there's holes in the band of the hose clamp and the hose can extrude through and actually can cause damage to the hose. So Mercedes does not use that. And if you look really carefully, most Mercedes come with hose clamps that have a 3-pointed star on them. Now, I don't typically penalize hose clamps that don't have 3-pointed stars, but I always penalize hose clamps that are Yankee clamps, that are the wrong type of hose clamp. I've seen a lot of the things in the engine compartment are kind of a semi-gloss black. I've seen two glossy finishes on them. And of course, you look at the inner fenders and see if there's corrosion or stains on them. Mercedes ignition coils are usually pretty boring and are usually black or dark gray. So if you see a really colorful ignition coil, it's probably not correct. Plating and painting on incorrect items, things that are done to make it shiny and pretty, probably not the way it came from the factory. Look carefully at the wiring harness. We have this wiring harness issue in 92 to early 95 cars, and you might actually be able to see that on some of those cars. And the hood springs are typically body color. All right, so let's look at some pictures. Okay, this is to show you clamps, and these are correct Mercedes clamps. But look how shiny this is. The car probably did not come from the factory with these pipes all shined up. Notice this hose clamp. This is what we call a Yankee clamp. This is what you see in American cars, and you should never see on a Mercedes. That is deficient, and that is probably the thing I see most often on a Mercedes in the engine compartment. Okay, this is yellow cad plating in here. This looks pretty good. Okay, this looks like a radiator cap for my tractor. This is not a Mercedes radiator cap, so that's deficient. There's also some corrosion dirt on top of the radiator. Nice Continental belt on this one and a nice Mercedes hose clamp here. This hose clamp has corrosion on it. There's also corrosion on this exhaust manifold here. This, it's hard to see in this, but there's Yankee clamps on this one. Okay, so that's deficient. Like I say, that's what I see the most often. This is a aftermarket ignition module mounted here. This is really kind of ugly. The air cleaner is dented. The fluid container here is discolored, stains. There's a lot of deficiencies in this engine compartment. Okay, this is a die-hard battery. This is not the correct battery for this car. It should at least be. I probably wouldn't penalize a Mercedes battery, although in that car that probably predates when Mercedes had batteries. There's a Canon air filter sticker up here. I had a car that had that once. I pulled the sticker off. Firewall grommets have cracks in them here, and there's actually dirt on the firewall here too. Okay, here's a couple of pictures since, batteries often come up in discussion. So I've dragged out a couple of pictures of original batteries. The top left is a 190 SL. And the 190 SL and the Pagodas came out before Mercedes had Mercedes branded batteries. And so during that period of time, there were only 3 manufacturers of batteries in these cars: Varda, Hopecki, and Bosch. And this is a Varda battery pictured in a 190 SL. And the actual correct 190 SL battery has exposed intercell connectors. Notice how the cells are connected here. You can actually see that. It's called a tar top battery. And that is the correct battery for a 190 SL. Now you shift to Pagoda, the next SL, and notice, and this is an original picture of a Pagoda. It's not a Concours car. And note that this battery doesn't have exposed intercell connectors, but it's got, the caps that you unscrew to check the electrolyte level. And so that's actually the correct battery for a Pagoda. And still it's going to be a Varda, Hopecki, or a Bosch as far as I know. Okay, so more engine compartment issues. Now this is, the valve cover's kind of got some corrosion, staining on it, and some corrosion down here. This valve cover has an oil leak on it. It's also a little too shiny. It really probably did not come from the factory, that shiny. Okay, this looks good. The right hose and good yellow cad plating on the injection lines here. Okay, blue ignition wires, probably not right for a Mercedes. And if you look down at this fan hub, there's rusty bolts here. All right, so here's a picture. And I wanted to get a picture. It didn't have a lot wrong with the engine compartment, just to give you a little short discussion about scoring. This is a 560 SL, and it's a really nice engine compartment. So looking around using the score sheet, what do we see? Well, the coolant reservoir is discolored. And so if you look at the score sheet, the cooling system has 2 points max. Okay, and of course, 1 authenticity and 1 is condition. It's authentic, its condition is degraded, and that it's turned yellow. And so that's probably a 1/4 point. And the other thing I see on this one, and this is really a pretty nice engine compartment, is the brake fluid reservoir here. Note how black the brake fluid is. Now, Mercedes requires brake fluid be changed every 2 years in all the maintenance schedules. And so if you do that, it'll never be black like that. And so I would deduct a 1/4 point for having degraded brake fluid. And I might even mention that to the owner as a safety deficiency. Okay, but other than that, there's not a lot wrong with that. But you see how you go through the methodology of looking at the value of that area on the scorecard and then deducting commensurate with that value. And there's some items that just aren't on the score sheet. I mentioned the air cleaner and the induction pipes are not on the engine compartment score sheet, and I think I would probably score those in miscellaneous items not covered. We mentioned windshield wipers, so windshield seal and trim is probably a good place for them. The belts really aren't covered, but the cooling system's in there and so on, so you can put them under the system that they're associated with, or use miscellaneous items not covered if you're not sure. How about improper ride height? Now, you don't see a lot of cars with improper ride height, but the air suspension cars or the ADS, the adaptive damping system cars, and the active body control cars can have ride height adjustments. And I've seen 109 chassis cars that have the wrong ride height. Where would you put that? Well, it turns out if you're in street category, there's really no place to put it on the scorecard. In show category, it's in you would put it in chassis and underbody for suspension, springs, and shocks. But above all, for things that aren't on the score sheet, when you see them more than once, be consistent in the way you treat them. And that's why I'm kind of covering them here to get you to think about it. All right, so we're getting to the end of our prepared presentation here. I'm glad to answer questions, but just to summarize, consistency is the most important thing about judging. We want to be fair to our competitors, and consistency is the vital piece of that fairness. You know, if one car has something deficient on it, something's taken off for it, that same amount should be taken off on the other car that has the same deficiency. The other major point is that in almost all cases on the scorecard, points are split between authenticity and condition, 50-50. And so do that thought process to make sure you're not over deducting. And of course, deduct points in proportion to the max points for that area. Remember, we want our entrants to come back. We want them to enjoy the concours, treat them that way, thank them for bringing their car, be very transparent about what you're taking off for, and give them the benefit of the doubt. Don't deduct if you're not sure. Okay. So let us go to the, we'll do some questions and then we'll have a break and we'll have a quiz. And I do not have the chat window up. So I'm going to come away from the presentation and hopefully get a chat window up. Diana, could you ask me some questions while I'm trying to get the chat window up, please?
Oh, actually, I think we've covered the ones that were from I think Nancy had a question. Oh, she had a question about custom cars and what about customizing that endangers driver safety? Well, I think anything that's a safety issue should be deducted and the owner notified.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I honestly haven't seen that. I just haven't seen that.
Yeah,
Have you, Nancy?
well, I've seen some crazy stories online about people altering their suspensions and doing crazy tire and wheel setups that the cars were never designed for. And I see that as a safety issue. I don't know how we want to address that in the custom class. Maybe that's something the Concours Committee will need to try to navigate, but I just thought I'd raise it since it sort of popped in mind during this discussion.
Well, let's think about what we might see in that area. It's very popular with Japanese cars to lower the car so much that they have a tremendous amount of negative camber, which I consider unsafe. If someone did that with a Mercedes in the custom category, yeah, I would probably take off for it someplace in the suspension area. And I would certainly talk to the owner about it. But, you know, I think the most important piece
A lot
of
of lowering on
it,
the 201 universe. So that's another reason I'm raising it now. It just kind of jogged my mind to start thinking about this again. So, okay. Yeah, no, I would agree with you.
yeah, I think the most important aspect of
If
that is
anybody's doing anything,
if you think it's a safety issue, you need to bring it to the driver's attention. Absolutely. The points are less important than
I agree. Yeah. No, I agree all the way around. Yep, we're on the same page.
Yeah.
okay.
Great. Okay, we got a couple other questions. Andrew, I think this is a great question. And do entrants receive their completed score sheets? I think it should be required.
They do.
Yeah, we didn't put a requirement for it in the rule book. I think it should be done. It should be encouraged for the computerized scoring that we're doing. It allows us to email the score sheets to the clients, which are to the entrants, which is actually a lot easier than dealing with paper score sheets.
Right. Otherwise they have to be scanned and everything.
Yep.
Let's hear, Mark, I think you asked a good question here too. Are there good websites that we can use as reference on model year and details and authenticity?
Wow, that's hard.
That's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really hard because, you know, and we were talking the other day about, gee, it would really be nice to have a document on that. But, you know, we've got a listing of paint codes that I can send out after this. That's fairly straightforward. But boy, authenticity to consider 300 SL gull wings. You know, I got a very nice brief by Mark Ritchie on his car and how it's a very early car and it's different from the later 300 SLs. If you consider 129s, you know, SLs from 1990 to 2001, there were a continuous procession of changes in the 129s, and there were some cars that were put out that aren't like any of the rest. Like there's one car in Carolina section that was one of two show cars that Mercedes did before Dizino. And so it's got color that you can't get on any Mercedes. It's got interior fabric that you never see on a Mercedes, and it's actually as it's delivered from the factory, and he's got the documentation for it. So, you know, and as you get newer and newer, I think you can probably buy a car configured almost as you want. So it's very useful for owners to have the documentation on what's authentic on the car. But man, there's a lot of variety in the cars, and you really have to enter it with a questioning attitude about whether or not Mercedes really could have built that, because there's a lot of things that don't seem to be authentic that really are authentic too. That's a hard
Yep.
problem.
Okay, so Michael asked, what is the position for chrome wheels, especially on 107s? Quite common in California.
The Mercedes does, with very few exceptions, Mercedes never delivers cars with chrome wheels. So chrome wheels are a deficiency. The only chrome wheel I know of delivered on a Mercedes is in the Maybach. I've seen a Maybach spec sheet with a chrome wheel. Other than that, DIN requirements, as I understand it, preclude highly reflective wheels in Germany, and so you never see that.
Okay, so Dwayne asked about license plate frames, dealer or custom, any deductions?
Let's see, we put a specific piece in the rule book about license plate frames, and I think we said in street class we weren't going to take off for them, and I think we were deducting for them in show class, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Mark Perry asks, like a 300 SL without bumpers, we have one here in Dallas, and I was not quite aware that that was an option at the time.
Yeah, I think there were actually a couple of them done without bumpers. There was one in Amelia last year with a very interesting story that did not have them.
Yeah. Then Dwayne, you ask about car wraps. Well, car wraps are clearly not a factory, right? It would be a deduction. Oh, what
Yeah.
would the deduction be? You know, we haven't seen wraps show up, but that's a good question.
Yeah, and you know, will you know it's a wrap is the first question. If you don't know it's a wrap, then it's probably not a deduction because you can't tell. But you know, the wrap is covering up the entire painted surface, and so you can't evaluate like 5 points of the car. And so I would probably, you know, take off significantly for the wrap. And the other thing about the wrap, you know, the wrap is there to protect the paint, and the wrap can get degraded. So you look carefully at the wrap. If you're going to show me a wrap, I'm going to look carefully at the wrap and take off points for deficiencies in the wrap.
A good comment from Steve. Steve, about the books. Bernard Colling has excellent books by model, including paint colors, chassis, data cards, etc., available on Amazon with some detail on Euro versus US. So thank you. Thank you.
Great comment. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Oh, Richard Cook says 300 SL Roadsters had a chrome wheel option. So
Really? I didn't know that.
didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Jeff Taylor, Beverly Hills Mercedes put chrome bunts on 107s. Well, they might have done that, but that's after.
That's a dealer thing, and that's penalized.
Yeah, 300 SLs could be ordered with no front or rear bumpers. 190 SLs too. I've not seen either of those. At least 190s I've not seen.
Yeah, I would hope the owner will recognize that that's a little bit unusual and bring something to help document that. Because I guess like I said, I've seen a 300 SL at Amelia without the bumpers, and it had the full story on it, but there aren't very many.
Mm-hmm. But it's good to know. Thanks, Richard.
Yep.
You're obviously a wealth of knowledge on gull wings and 190s.
Yeah, I learn something every time I do this too. Now it's if we've gotten through the questions, let's go ahead and let Sam talk a little bit about the.
Take a break. Let's take
you want to take a break? Okay.
About a 10-minute break, maybe.
Okay, let's take a short break, and Sam's going to talk through the way we're going to use Google Sheets to help automate scoring. And